So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks out for your patience. We are a bit of, we are in a bit of delay, and I'm really honored to have the chance to moderate this discussion with perfect experts and even a politician. And we will talk about patterns of foreign malign influence into European politics from different perspectives. I have the honor of moderating the panel with the longest title, and on the other hand, unfortunately, our time won't be that long. We will have 45 minutes to discuss, so I would like to ask for all of our speakers to be short and punctual in their responses, to have a dynamic discussion. And let me introduce the speakers. So to my right, we have Matej Šimalčík, Executive Director of Central European Institute of Asian Studies, China scholar with a vast expertise. To his right, we have Olga Richterová, member of Deputy Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies from the Czech Republic, representing the Czech Pirate Party, which is one of the parties that is the most outspoken in Central Eastern Europe when it comes to malign foreign interference. We also have Dimitry, Professor Dimitry Kochenov, who is a distinguished legal scholar. He is leading the Rule of Law Working Group at the CEU Democracy Institute and teaches at the Department of Legal Studies in Vienna. And last but not least, we have Roland Freudenstein here as well, who is the director of Free Russian Foundation Brussels, founder and chief executive officer of Brussels Freedom Hub, and a long-time Brussels insider. So, just short of introduction, I would say, and I will be publishing some of our work that have just came out. So there is a short paper we wrote, Growing Influence of Russia and China in the New European Parliament. You can find it outside at the entrance. And this is a short summary of a material that we produced with the support of the National Endowment for Democracy. And the most important finding of this short piece is that in the upcoming European Parliament there will be stronger potential for malign foreign interference, for the simple reason that the political forces outside the mainstream, on the radical left and the radical right, have increased their share of the votes. And even if they have been put to a certain extent in political quarantine, it does not mean that they remain without political influence. So it will be one topic that we are going to discuss. And also, just as a context, there is what we see in Europe these days is a hybrid warfare against the West from Russia has intensified. Also, there are intensifying attempts from China to exert economic influence in Europe, especially in certain countries, including Hungary, including Serbia, but not limited to these countries. And at the same time, legal steps of some member states can exacerbate the problem of foreign malign influence. So, for example, visa eases for Russians and Belarusians by Hungary that sparked a huge debate within the European Union and also needs some legal expertise to talk about. So, without further ado, I would jump to and raise questions to the panel. My first question would go to you, Olga, and I would like to ask a bit about Czech Republic. So Czech Republic is seen in the Central Eastern European region as one of the countries that even officially stepped up its efforts to reduce even bilateral ties with Russia and China to a quite spectacular extent, but on the other hand as well to step into diplomatic conflicts when it comes to issues such as Taiwan, for example, and when it comes to the some of the realists in Central Eastern Europe argues that if you poke the bear, if you poke the dragon, that it will ultimately hurt you and it will destroy your economy and destroy your political future. So how does it seem? What's the perspective in Czech Republic? What are the experiences?
Thank you for the question. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you for having me. And I'm just wondering, we are here in the so-called preaching to the converted bubble. And I'd like to make this a point in our discussion. In the Czech Republic, there is one important notion that is not forgotten yet, and I'm underlining the yet. And that's the fact that we've been occupied by the Russian army, or the Soviet army, composed of other nations as well, in 1968, and that was for 20 years. And this important historical fact, the fact that it was a huge thing in the 1990 and 1991, getting rid of the Soviet soldiers, this fact remained in the Czech historical memory. And going to your question, what implications does in our current political situation have being outspoken about Russia and also in the longer term about China? It was a very important topic in the last elections. Our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jan Lipavsky, was very outspoken regarding the threat of Rosatom, the Russian energy company, taking part in building our second part of our nuclear power plant. So, take this example. In Hungary, you have Pact 2, you have close cooperation with the aggressor. In the Czech Republic, we were on the way to having such a G2G cooperation, but from the opposition, we were able to block it for a long time, and then Vrbětice event came. I'll be short. It was a sabotage event that caused by Russian agents in the Czech Republic at the Czech territory. It led to death of several Czech citizens. It was a huge disaster, and as a follow-up, even the previous government had to take a much stronger stance towards Russia, because the general public saw again Russians are doing acts of sabotage, Russians are posing a threat. So, wrapping it up, even outside of the bubble of informed and converted Russia opponents, there was this general public meaning, okay, Russia is a threat. Following invasion of Ukraine, like the larger invasion, of course, there's been occupation of Crimea before that, and Donetsk and Luhansk. It was still clear that the public is in favor of being strongly opposed to Russia because it is a threat. And now we are at the breaking point of, are we able to explain that certain economic implications of the global situation are what it takes to be able to withhold such an aggressor. And this ability to explain is something I think we should be discussing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Matej, I would turn to you now. And yeah, the political situation in Slovakia seems a bit different. At the moment, with the new government having a stronger openness to even amplify some of the messages that Russia likes to send to the world about the invasion in Ukraine, but also to open up to China. So how much you think that the Slovakian political system, which seems to be way more dynamic than Hungary, for example, to say how much you think it can be captured by foreign influences from Russia and China, for example?
Well, thanks, Péter, for this question, because we are really finding Slovakia right now at a very crucial junction point where things can flip one or the other way. Of course, all of the principles of democracy are being challenged by the current government led by Prime Minister Fico, who won the election last year, even though a few years before that it seemed that his political career is nearing end. But during the polycrisis of COVID and Russian aggression of Ukraine, he managed to, thanks to very hostile narratives supported both by Russia and China, managed to make a political comeback and come back stronger than ever, despite a failed attempt on his life. He's now really on riding the high horse, right, and doing all he can to overcome all of the pre-existing constraints of such all-out exercise of or misuse of power, culminating actually yesterday, right, with the recall vote of the opposition deputy chairman of the parliament, Mr. Šimalčík from Progressive Slovakia, who was, despite this being highly debated in the public forum, voted out of the position of deputy chairmanship in the parliament, coupled with dismantling of public media, attacks on cultural representatives, attacks on NGO, and any form of institutions that are able to exercise some form of oversight over exercise of power by Prime Minister Fico and his collaborators. So this is a very significant situation which impacts also the ability of China and Russia to spread its own tentacles within Slovak society. We've already seen this before Fico won the election, how this was sort of unveiling, and how China is also slowly occupying positions that were typically reserved for Russia. Actually, what we've seen, for example, during the pre-election campaign from the mouth of Robert Fico was not necessarily going full out on replicating the Russian propaganda on the war, but rather Chinese propaganda on the war, promoting the so-called Chinese peace plan as part of his election campaign. If you remember, this political pamphlet by China was unveiled on the first anniversary of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the very same day, Robert Fico and several of his party fellows were invited to the Chinese embassy to be presented with the plan, and the very same day they even called for a public press conference to, provide their view on this, and pretty much to laud China on its efforts to promote peace. And I will quote the well-known Mr. Blaha on this, who uttered a memorable sentence: "China just gave hope to the world." And so we see that the Smer political party and its affiliates are now no longer focused only on promoting Russia or utilizing Russia as a tool for their own political gains, but increasingly working with the China angle as well, which is sort of mutually reinforcing, right? China using Smer government to promote its own interests within Slovakia and EU, and also Smer utilizing China for their own political goals. So this is not a relationship where one uses the other. It's a mutually beneficial relationship for them. This will, of course, culminate the coming November, when Prime Minister Fico will travel to Beijing on a long-awaited trip, after which we will probably know even more about his plans on collaboration with China and potential influx of Chinese corrosive capital into Slovakia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Roland, I would turn to you now for a big picture on Europe. How do you see, after the last European Parliament election, the chances of this, of Russian and Chinese voices being amplified in the European Parliament? As it was mentioned before, political capital have found in a study that the left group, so the radical left, the ID group beforehand, which has transformed into the Patriots for Europe, and also transferred partially to the sovereignist of Europe. So the far right have been the political forces in the European Parliament that were the most supportive towards both Russia and China in terms of resolutions and so on. And if we also mention one not that non-important member state of the European Union, Germany, we just had regional elections where we could definitely see that the radical left and the radical right was on the rise. And these are exactly the political forces that seem to be quite efficient in channeling Russian rhetoric into German and European politics. So how do you see the prospects of the next few years?
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Péter, that bunch of questions is enough for a 1 hour answer, but I'm going to spare you this. No, with all due, first of all, starting with the European Parliament, with all due respect to that lovely institution, it doesn't really decide over foreign and security policy. It can adopt resolutions, it can have initiative reports and so on, but the danger when it comes to a robust, a resilient European Union vis-à-vis Russia and China and other autocracies, that danger is in the Council. So I'm not deflecting attention here or anything. I'm just saying that let's remain realistic and see the Parliament for what it is, a forum for debate, when it comes to foreign policy. Of course, the Parliament does decide over things like budget, many aspects of legislation in single market and so on, and those have implications in foreign policy. But the foreign policy proper is decided in the Council, and that's where autocratic governments, such as the Hungarian one, develop their dangerous tendencies. So it's up to the other member states to push back. And again, of course we have ominous developments in the European Parliament. You gave a couple of examples on the extreme left, on the extreme right. But that is not the big disaster or the nefarious development that I would indeed agree is happening in Europe. Now, pushing back against governments of member states actively undermining a robust European Union that defends freedom and defends itself against autocratic threats from the outside. Now that's the task that we need to discuss, and where I think the other member states a couple of years ago already have finally come to the conclusion that it is possible to sanction violations of the rule of law with the rule of law conditionality, you know, to just react with instruments that actually hurt, which is money. And when it comes to undermining robust foreign policies and so on, there needs to be, there is plenty of opportunities for the other member states to make it clear to governments like the Hungarian one currently, Slovakia possibly, although they have on foreign and security policy behaved so far. But there are plenty of ways. Well, you know, Slovakia produces more ammunition for Ukraine now than before last summer. You know, Slovak jobs for Slovak workers seems to always work, even for national populists. But there are ways to respond to the constant undermining of our resilience against Russia and China that Viktor Orban is practicing here. Just two points to finish with. One is, look, autocratic threats from the outside utilize conflicts and failures of democracies that were produced here. That they don't produce anything. They reinforce dangerous developments, but the developments are there. And democratic politics has to get better at delivering solutions to those problems. I'm only saying migration. You know, I mean, Donald Tusk, for example, in 2015 was mad as hell about Angela Merkel. You know, maybe in this environment is a pretty sacrilegious thing to say, but I'm saying it anyway. You know, liberal democracies have failed to deliver on a couple of things, and they shouldn't be surprised that autocrats inside and outside instrumentalize that. And the other thing I want to say is you know, just pointing fingers at people and institutions and say, he's on the payroll of the Kremlin, she is a victim of Russian disinformation, is not enough. And unfortunately, too often, this itself replaces rational argument. Of course, you know, I'm not trying to convince Mr. Maximilian Krah, one of those European members of the European Parliament that, in this case, actually, he's been proven to have worked not only with the Russians, but also with the Chinese. Well, that's a fantastic achievement. But you know, I'm not trying to convince him or the people working in his office, or maybe even many of his voters. Who I'm trying to appeal to is the bystanders, is the people who are not sure what they're going to vote in the next election, and who say that, well, these populist narratives have some credibility to them. But, you know, if I get a proper argument why a Russian victory would be a disaster for the whole of Europe and for liberty and freedom in the entire world, then I'm willing to consider that for my next electoral decision. So we need to make those arguments. The fight with national populism has to be a political one, not just pointing fingers and saying, these are the spokesmen of the Kremlin, as if that was already an argument. I'm afraid we're past the point where that kind of rhetoric had a positive effect. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Dimitry, my question to you would be that how much you think that the developments since the Russian invasion started against Ukraine have changed the legal thinking in Europe about possible solutions to step up against certain forms of malign influence? I'm thinking, for example, about things that have been pretty unimaginable before. For example, confiscating some assets of Russian oligarchs, for example, and also channeling some of them into funds to help Ukraine, or also plans to help the Ukrainian military as well. Or also there are a lot of debates about to let Russian and even Belarusian citizens into Europe, which seem to be a highly divisive issue in Europe, with some member states rather stepping up for visa restrictions, some others, like Hungary, rather visa easing. And I know you have a lot of legal expertise on the very topic of visas, so we would really like to hear your opinion on that.
That's a wonderful question, in fact. It's not as complex as it might seem. We do law here, so I chair the rule of law working group, and the rule of law is about holding those who have the power to account. So in this sense, there's a natural fight always between the law and between the attempts to politicize the law. And what we see in the EU and also at the level of the member states, unfortunately, that the brilliant edifice of rule of law mechanisms that was elaborated, especially by the Court of Justice, but also by other institutions, has been crumbling under this politicizing influence. And we can have all kinds of positive or negative thinking that underpins this influence, but it's a fact that the start of the war in Ukraine has undermined the EU's ability to stick to its own law. And this is something that we need to be open about, because when the vote in Council depends on Mr. Orban going to the loo, and then as a result an illegal decision is taken, then the EU is weaker. Because our only strong point against all the adversaries, all what we're discussing here today, is precisely adhering to the values what we have enumerated quite clearly in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union: democracy, the rule of law, protection of human rights. And then those values should not be departed from based on short-term political goals of one political meeting. And we have been writing about it with colleagues from all kinds of places, including Hungary, and then the Hungarian government ironically reacted. So one of our colleagues from CEU was attacked in all the newspapers, exactly what the American ambassador described. Every single council leaflet wrote that there is a traitor at CEU. It was a co-authored paper between me, my name is too Russian, and her. So they were always mentioning there is a traitor working with a co-author. But what the traitor working with a co-author said was actually quite a fundamental issue, forgetting about our own law, which is our strength in integration through law, in the name of however rosy political goals, is not the way to proceed with European integration. And here I would like to invite you to take a step back and appraise how the EU appears from the point of view of values outside of the Union. Not in the US, not in Australia, not in China, but in the poorest countries in the world. And here we see a radically different picture. Because when we speak about values, the best test of values exactly is what is being done. So, starting with migration, what has been already mentioned, the EU helped drown by now 28,000 people in the Mediterranean in less than 10 years. The EU financed shady guys in Libya who are on the sanctions list of the US government, flushing them with money to make sure that 120,000 more end up in strange prisons outside of our ambit of values, which means that the EU is turning into an active exporter of violence and instability outside of its borders, especially in the poorest countries. And this allows us to rethink what we think about EU's foreign policy towards those places, because we keep on paying billions having one particular goal in mind. That one particular goal in mind is to make sure that less brown people come to this continent. And this is what Hans Kundnani has described as the Euro-whiteness objective of the European Union. I think we should be very aware of this, because with this kind of practice of day-to-day deployment of our budgets and our resources and our forces, the use of Frontex in such a way that de facto it's breaking criminal law of all the member states bordering on the Mediterranean, because there are Italian captains serving prison sentences for bringing people back to Libya, while Frontex was organized in order to help doing precisely that. We have plentiful rule of law problems. And then the last point, of course, is visas. Since you mentioned it specifically, I think when a violent conflict between a terrible regime like Putin's Russia is and democracy is starting, then of course people suffer on both sides. And in this sense, the Commission stands in terms of enforcing basic law and accountability against the countries which break the visa code and depart from European Union law in terms of having a very one-sided approach to whom they welcome in terms of refugees and in terms of visa holders is also a scandal. And we have written about that with colleagues in the Yale International Law Journal, because to say that some Schengen visas will be ignored because those visas unfortunately are placed in Russian passports is not a legally mandated answer, which is not supposed to be given by an organization which is driven by the values of Article 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Olga, I would come back to you. And yeah, Roland mentioned that, finally it will be the...
Could we have a reaction to all this? Because it's necessary to react.
Do.
I mean, come on. We are speaking about a huge rise of populist parties, and we are not speaking honestly about the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that people are afraid of the rise in immigration, are afraid of what's happening in the streets, and at some places, rightly so. And we are unable to deliver the safety we promised as democracies to deliver to our citizens. I mean, as an academic, you can theorize about whatever you want, but in reality, if we want to protect democracy and protect the values we stand for, I promise I stand for these values, we have to take into account the reality. And the reality is that despite the fact that we might wish to be welcoming and open and everything, it's not possible for the majority. And we have to adapt to the reality and live with it and find solutions to the real shortcomings of democracies we are seeing in the moment, such as that small crimes in the street are not being addressed because there is not enough police force. For example, I'm just giving one small example as an illustration of the larger fact. Unless we deliver to our citizens, there will not be long-term democracy in Europe.
Just a very quick,
Roland, did
quick
you want to
correction.
react also?
She said it perfectly.
Yeah,
Okay.
a very quick correction. No democracy, like there is a famous statement by Professor Weiler that the democracy of vile people is vile. No democracy can escape the control of the law if the demanded outcome is mass murder. So if you kill 85,000 people in the sea and you say that your democracy demands it, it means that we have a very serious rule of law problem here. And this is precisely why I studied the rule of law. Whatever the people want stops at the basic guarantees of our values, of our human rights, protecting democracy precisely from such kind of people getting the upper hand, and observing what human rights and rule of law guarantees demand. So the Mare Nostrum has never been so dangerous as it is now since the Roman times. Having thousands of people drowning every month is something that is an overtly exaggerated outcome, which I think fuels precisely the kind of populist forces that those who orchestrated this system hope to tame in some way.
Okay, thank you. We frequently receive the criticism that in Budapest Forum we don't have real debates on the floor. Right now we do have that. I think is also an important. But I will be the moderator who, the rigid one who just pulls back the discussion to its origins to
But
Russian
sorry,
and Chinese.
this is exactly the debate we need to be having. The debate is: do we accept reality, or do we shut our eyes and say, in our ideal world, this should not be the thing we are debating? The ideal is not working because we live in not a black and white reality. It's shady. And we have to accept that and then debate what are the steps. And I'm just saying, in the reality we are living in, the fact that Voice of Europe, this European-wide platform promoting Russian opinions in our countries, could pay real money, big money, to politicians elected to the European Parliament. It was not just Maximilian Krah, it was also Péter Bystroň, unfortunately, a man of Czech origin, living in Germany, serving now the European Parliament as an MEP. And we are debating rule of law, and we are not delivering on the fact that our secret services have proven these people taking Russian money. What do we want to see in 5 years' time?
Okay, thank you. Matej, I would follow up on this thought in the sense that, we have started to discuss public opinion in Central and Eastern Europe and how voters resonate to certain political solutions, messages, but also to topics. So what you have done research on, in particular on China, that what is the perception of China in Central and Eastern Europe and how much China is perceived to be a threat here. We will introduce the results of a poll tomorrow. A colleague of mine, Dimitry, will show it, but it shows that in Slovakia, this is mostly United States that is seen to be the malign actor that is interfering into politics. In Czech Republic, it's Russia. In Hungary, it's both. So both United States and Russia are perceived as somehow malign actors. So can you zoom out a bit and paint a big picture? If you happen to have some polls, by the way, on immigration, that really seems to be a hot topic for the European public, it's also welcome.
Yeah, we've done some extensive polling on perception of China, not just in Central Europe, but globally in approximately 50 countries. But looking at our region, and please mind that when we've done it, it's been a while since then, right? So you might have fresh results tomorrow, but the picture we've seen was that at that time, there was growing negative perception of China, right? And this was very much tied to how perception of China was evolving during COVID pandemic, right? Like having origin in China, it was having influence on public opinion, right? But that being said, we should also not overestimate this how public opinion views China, right? Because let's say influencing public opinion, in my view, has always been a secondary goal for China and its malign activities in the region. Its primary targets were always elites and attempts to engage in elite capture, right? And then maybe work through that down towards the general public, right? Not necessarily relying so much on a bottom-up approach through the public, then towards the elite, which, if we sort of simplify, could be described as a Russian approach that was usually used in Central Europe. So this, I think, is something we really need to keep in mind when talking Chinese influence activities here, right? Like whether to focus predominantly on its attempts to influence public opinion, or rather on its elite capture activities. And until now, those seem to have been much more effective in promoting Chinese goals, right? Like, look, China is learning, it's improving its communications game here in the region, but it's still not as effective as Russia, right? But it has been far more effective maybe in working with oligarchs, working with different segments of political spectrum, and working with owners of disinformation outlets, right? So it's going in that direction of influencing the public directly, but whereas elite capture activities are still its primary tool for operating here. Just look at Slovakia, right? Like China is sort of getting its interests promoting precisely thanks to the fact that they've over the years invested into capturing politicians across the political spectrum, right? And I've talked a lot about the Smer party, but it's not only about the Smer party. There's growing ties to the far right parties, who seem to be very eager to start working with China, and these are really parties of like Mr. Uhry, who we really can, I think, safely say that these are parties bordering on neo-Nazism. So really furthers of the far right, right? Where China seems to be heading now as well in terms of fostering ties. We see them bringing these types of politicians onto junket trips, working with disinformation outlets that are very typically in favor of these parties and promoting these parties. And actually last year we've done a small analysis of social media discourse on China, and what we've seen was that the far-right politicians are nowadays talking more about China than even Smer party. So there is a little bit of a shift, and down the line it will probably also have some impact on the public opinion, which I think it sort of works with your finding that the US is now seen by Slovak public as the top malign actor, given that it's precisely these popular far-right voices that are instrumentalizing China as a tool to promote the entire Westernness in order to sort of smear US and the EU.
Thank you. Roland, let's combine the two topics that was on the table. I mean, one malign foreign interference and pro-Russian, pro-Chinese sentiments, and the other one is immigration. So in the German elections that, we briefly mentioned last time, it was the two regional elections, the parties that did the best are the parties on the radical left and the radical right, who are both pro-Russian in their rhetoric, and on the other hand, staunchly anti-immigration. So how do you think that democratic parties, or let's say parties on the mainstream, can tackle this challenge? Because it seems that, in German politics, immigration is really an urgent issue, and we know it from all Eurobarometer polls that it's in most countries number one, in some others number two topic at the moment.
All right, two things. These regional elections, the two we had and the one that's coming up in a few days, are in Eastern Germany, and this is a very specific situation. We've had an East-West gap in Germany, logically, since unification in 1990, but the fact that it seems to have gotten wider in the last couple of years, maybe months only, there's been a huge intensification of this feeling that East Germans have a different mindset from West Germans. And of course, we're talking about majorities of people, not every single citizen, but that's a new thing, and I think we're still trying to analyze this. It certainly has been strengthened by social media. It's been strengthened by COVID, by the way, like so many other successes of national populists, and radical thinking in general has been reinforced by the pandemic, and it's been strengthened by, in this German case, a general socio-economic time of troubles after 30 very successful years in Germany after unification. So the rise of the national populist right in Eastern Germany is an effect of this East-West gap that is reopening now in Germany. Again, the answer to this is obviously addressing the objective socio-economic problems and trying to be more constructive on keeping borders secure and avoiding the impression of a country's borders being not properly controlled by the government. And with Schengen and so on, there are lots of complicating factors that we can't go into now, but this is the reaction of mainstream parties. And here's the second point I want to make. There's a famous, very popular saying about mainstream parties copying populist parties and thereby only making them stronger. Because the voters will always prefer the original to the copy. Well, if that was true, please explain to me how Danish Social Democrats managed to basically reduce national populists in Denmark, who were a force to be reckoned with, one of the strongest parties of the country, how to reduce them to near zero. Explain that to me. If the copy original statement was true in all countries. It has some credibility in some cases, but please let us take case by case here. And the fact that mainstream parties finally start talking about and offering solutions to problems that were before not sufficiently discussed and certainly not sufficiently addressed is a healthy development. And here we completely differ. I respect your opinion, dear Dimitry, but we have different approaches here. And that's a good thing because we're here to debate, actually.
Exactly. Dimitry, very quick reaction.
No, I actually agree that we need to address the problems, criminality in the streets, open borders if they let some bad people in, but a huge death toll is also a problem. And designing the policies that are purposefully removed from the purview of all our values and investing billions into making crossings much more dangerous is not something that our law should allow us to do. So my basic message is that we should absolutely hold the EU to the same account as we hold the member states to. And this is the only way for us to be different precisely from Russia, China, and any other place which we see as alien for a good reason. We see them as alien for a good reason because they don't value the law. They don't have those values. And this is here, I fully agree with what the ambassador said earlier. So in order to fight for the values, very often we need to go against what the populists want. And the populists always speak about borders. And the populists always speak about crime in the streets. But in fact, these are not always the real problems. The real problem sometimes is that the law is waning away, and then we become similar to those whom we are officially opposing ourselves to. So in order to address this, we are actually hosting an event on the 28th of October in Brussels at EPC, where we will be presenting a report about the state of the rule of law in the EU, because of course the EU itself only speaks about the member states. It never self-assesses its rule of law successes. So CEU Democracy Institute and our clinic focusing on the rule of law, which is funded by Mercator, will offer this service to the European Union, and anyone who is interested is more than welcome. It's the 28th of October at EPC.
Thank you. Olga, very brief final remark.
Well, I think this is a very precious time of many clever people in this room, and that we should become aware that every time people meet like this, discuss, and do nothing afterwards is a wasted time. And at this very moment, we are just discussing things instead of looking into the reason of Danish success, for example. Because the thing is, what you mentioned, the problems of the people, like crime in the streets, might not be the real problems. Well, the thing is, they are real problems when they are perceived by the public as such. And this is the thing. Unless we see problems perceived as such by the public as the issues to tackle, we will be unable to uphold any values, because strength and power will prevail. You try to promote rule of law, but maybe in some issues you have mentioned, there are some assumptions that are actually not that basic, such as the right to come to the EU, which might not be the basic assumption underlying our values. On the other hand, the value of every human life in the EU is, for example, a value embodied in the quality of the healthcare systems. That's why it's such a huge problem that, for example, as far as I have learned, unfortunately, the quality of healthcare, both in Hungary and in Slovakia, has strongly declined in the recent years due to lack of funding, because of probably some possible corruption links, and lack of willingness to invest in public healthcare. And I am trying to show you the fact that embodying important values for every human life into real outputs, such as quality healthcare, is what we should really look into. And just to close with the Danish example, they have always focused on their national identity, knowing once you are strongly rooted in your local identity, you're not afraid of opening up. And these might be the topics for us to take action in, just suggesting.
Thanks a lot, and thank you for all of you for the lively debate, and I would ask the audience to give a big applause to our speakers.